Hi, I'm Mercedes Fobb at the Captured on Canvas studio. Welcome to Picture This. For today's painting, picture this. We have a night scene with a lantern, has a nice warm glow in the snow, holding a berry wreath. Before we get started, let's make sure we have everything in front of us. Most importantly, on my easel, I have my 16 by 20 canvas that is going to be my masterpiece today. On my paint palette, I'm going to be using these following colors. A lot of white, black, primary blue, primary yellow, primary red, and a little bit of green. For our paintbrushes today, we're going to be using our large flat brush, our medium flat brush, and last but not least, our tiny round tip for tiny detail. And don't forget a sponge and a cup of water for cleaning those brushes. Anytime I start a painting, I always start with the background and paint the closest thing last. That being said, I have a lot of work ahead of me. To get that kind of spongy, kind of frosty background, I'm going to go ahead and start preparing some of my colors. With my largest brush, I'm going to mix a kind of medium to light gray. Starting with a big scoop of white, say at least the size of 2/4. And then I'm going to take a little bit of black on the corner of my brush and mix that in. Trying to keep it in a nice little pile. All right, now that I got my color, I'm going to go ahead and wipe off that extra paint on the side of my palette. And then I'm going to clean it. So I'm going to gently stir in the cup of water, wipe it on the sides, and repeat until I get it all clean. To start this background, I'm actually going to do something a little different. I'm not going to be using a paintbrush. I'm going to use a paper towel. I'm just going to scrunch it up, and this is going to be used basically like a sponge. So with that paper towel, making sure I kind of tuck in all those loose ends, I'm going to start with white, kind of dabbling where I want the glow of my lantern, about halfway up on my canvas, maybe a third from the right. So taking a good glob of white on there, and start dabbling from the middle here, and work your way out. Sometimes I got to put my palette down to hold onto my canvas so it doesn't bounce back at me. But from here, I'm just going to spiral out. And I want this to be as big as my hand. Taking more white, just dabbling. It's kind of funny because we're painting a white canvas white, but it does help a lot with the next step and getting it blended. Okay, so it's at least the size of my hand. I'm going to start going back into that gray that we prepared a little bit ago. Using that same part of the sponge, we're just going to load it up with paint today. So with that, I'm going to go all the way around that white to start. All the way around, dabbling, and allowing some of that white of the canvas to show through. This is going to give it that cool sponge look and variations of that gray and white. And it's important to keep working while this paint is wet. It's going to help one color blend into the next. So I'm going to go back into some white to give it a nice lighter glow up in this corner. Still the same paper towel, same spot. Just going to start dabbling a bunch of white. So from maybe that glow here, carrying it up to that corner. Maybe there's another lantern or a light source shining the background here. Continuing that as well around the edge. Okay. Now I'm going to add a little bit of green in this background. I want it to look like maybe there's some trees kind of hiding in the background, but it's out of focus. I'm going to still use this same paper towel, and now I'm going to use a little bit of this green. I'm just going to start a little bit dabbling on a clean spot on my palette and starting right underneath, dabbling a good amount of that on there. Okay, now while that green is wet, I'm going to go on to my next layer of our background, still using that same part of the paper towel and using black. So just a little bit of black. I'm going to start at the bottom in these little corners here, still dabbling and allowing some of that white canvas to show through and blending it a little bit with that green as well. Once again, remembering those sides. And sometimes with this black, it's really good not to have too much on there. It's the darkest color, so a little bit will kind of go a long way. We don't want to cover up all that green. And you can always work on the bottom edge of your canvas as well with that black. I might just kind of darken this upper corner too while I got some black on here. Starting from the corner. And then working my way to the gray to allow it to blend in a little bit. Remembering those sides again. There you go. I want to add a little bit of color in the background though, so I might just grab a new paper towel, or you can fold this one over. Yeah, I'll just grab a new one. And I'm going to take a little bit of blue and yellow and add that throughout my background. So with that, once again, just scrunch it up in a little ball, making sure there's no loose ends. And I'm going to take a little bit of blue, dabbling it off because I don't want too much. And I'm going to choose to add it in areas kind of going around in that circular motion here. So maybe over here in the right side, I might do a little bit of dabbling. And the more you go over this, the more it's going to get blended. And if I want to add a little bit of yellow to highlight more of a warm glow for my lantern for later, I might just fold over my paper towel, grab another new area, and then a little bit of yellow. Just going to kind of dabble in that area that the gray met the white. I have too much, so even dabble it off. Honestly, there's no right and wrong with this background, it's just a little bit of play. So there's one more thing we can do to our background so it doesn't look so spongy. We're going to use our large square tip brush, and if you have a lot of wet paint here, all you can do is smear it a little bit so it softens those edges. If it's not wet, or if your paint's dry, you may want to add a little bit of water to your brush, and that'll be just enough to carry that paint a little bit. And keep in that circular motion. And maybe with a little bit of white, I can add a little bit of frost to this as well. So very little, just kind of dusting it in, still in that circular motion around that glow. All right, and once you have finished that, we're going to go ahead and clean off our brush, and we'll take a little break. Welcome back to Picture This. Now that I have finished my background, I'm going to start my lantern. I'm going to start with the lit part of the lantern using my large square tip brush. I'm going to start with a big scoop of yellow, about the size of a quarter, and separate that on my palette. Then I'm going to take a good little scoop of yellow on the corner of my brush and mix that together. And I like to warm it up a little bit, give it a little bit of a gold tone. So I'm going to take a little bit of red, just the tiniest bit, because if you add too much, it will turn orange. So tiny, tiny bit, and mix that in. And if you find that that's not really working, you can always go back and add a little bit of yellow too. So it's just a little bit softer. Now I'm going to start that lantern. I'm going to start with 2 dots, one for the bottom and the top. I want that bottom of the lit part of the lantern to be about halfway up on my canvas and maybe about a third from the right. So I'm going to go ahead and make a dot there. And then I want it to be at least, if I relax my hand open, I want it to be a good size. So maybe about a quarter of the way down from the top of my canvas. So sometimes I like to just draw a straight line now. So it's really easy to make this lantern symmetrical from the left to the right. Here I'm going to make a couple angles. So from the bottom here, I'm just going to make a little line going to the left and to the right for the center of my lantern. And I want it to look 3-dimensional. So now I'm going to have these angles going down maybe about 2 fingers width to the left and to the right. And I like my lantern to kind of flare up to the top, getting a little bit wider. So I'm going to do that same exact thing at the top, but making it wider. So up at the top, using the thin side of my brush, carrying that out a little bit farther to the left and to the right, and an angle down. And let's make sure that this angle is the same as up here, and that it is just a little bit wider. Mirror that over here. And to finish, we are going to connect those 2 ends. So from here, nice slight curve, and then going straight down to that lower right. And then I'm going to mirror that on this side. From that little corner, slight curve, and straight down. Now we can just color it in. To shadow it a little, I'm going to make a darker golden color. So I'm going to still use this pile here, same brush, and I'm going to add a big scoop of this yellow. And mix that in. And this time I'm going to add just a little bit more red. Just a little bit, mix that in. Okay, so with very little bit of this paint on the brush, I like to dabble it off to make sure I don't have too much, if I'm not making a mess while doing it. But with a little bit of that on the end, I'm going to start with just fat outline across the top to be a shadow underneath the rest of my lantern later. So I'm just going to follow it all the way across. Take a little bit more paint, and I'm going to go a little bit lower and do the same thing. I might even shadow the right side, so using the thin side of the brush coming down, and then I'm going to flick my brush. So holding it standing up, flicking to the left with that upward curve to shadow this right side. And I'm going to continue that all the way down. That's good. So I'll just wipe off some of that extra paint and clean off my brush. For the next part, I'm going to continue with the black part of my lantern. So I'm going to use that middle-sized brush and the black. I'm going to start with a nice simple step, and that's just going to be outlining those bottom and top angles that we just got done doing. So with that black middle flat tip brush, using a thin side, so if I'm going left and right, holding it horizontally, light pressure, I'm just going to follow all the way across underneath. And I might have it go out just a little bit farther to the left and right to give it a little bit of an edge. And I'm going to continue to do that same thing across the top. Might make a little bit of a larger overhang there. And remember, sometimes the quicker you move, the smoother those lines are. Now we want this to look three-dimensional, so I will have a little bit of that edge going behind the lantern. So from this little corner here, just going to draw that line back like a little triangle, mirroring that on the other side, and making sure not to go too much. Sometimes we can overdo it, so it's just a nice little narrow triangle. Follow the side of the lantern, color it in. And we can continue with that top. Sometimes I like to thicken this up a little bit more, maybe using the wide side of my brush. Now I'm going to make that dome for the top. So nice light pressure. I want it to be about half the distance from the top of this here and the top of my canvas, somewhere in there. I like to make a dot, and I'm going to curve down, making a half circle into kind of that middle angle there, and doing the same thing on the right side. Doing your best to make it symmetrical, and then color it in. Nice even brush strokes. All right. Depending on how much room you have left, you can always customize how you have the little top of your lantern. For me though, I do have enough room to have a couple little designs to it. So I'm going to start with a triangle right in the center, maybe no taller than the height of my brush, angling down to the left and to the right, and coloring it in. I'm going to make one more triangle upside down, just as wide, meeting right at the top there, and color it in. And across the top, I like to have a little bit of an upward curve there. So we're kind of looking up at the lantern. And last but not least, I'm going to add just kind of a half circle right up at the top. Kind of spinning my brush in my hand. Sometimes a small brush might help you better there. And now we finish the top. Now we're going to mirror that same type of deal on the bottom. We're just going to have a big smiley face connecting from one angle to the other. So somewhere in the middle here, I'm going to loop it down and up to the right and color it in. Once again, nice even long brush strokes. And with this little corner here, we're going to do the same thing as we did up there, that little triangle, so that it looks like it's actually continuing around the back side of the lantern. So from this tip here, I'm going to draw pretty much a straight line right into the side of that circle. And then we're going to color it in. All right, now we're going to continue down for the rest of our lantern. We have the stand, and that is just going to be centered to our lantern going all the way down to the bottom of the canvas. So use the thin side of your brush and just draw that straight line. That's a little thin for the post, so we're going to add a little bit of thickness to it. Up at the top here, I wanted to have this nice little extra curve. Give it a little bit more shape. So from here, I'm just going to curve a little bit out to the left and down to the right. Doesn't need to be much, maybe the width of 2 to 3 fingers. And then I'm going to come straight down to the bottom. Once again, lifting it up so I can get down there. Go straight down and maybe go out a little bit to the left so that the bottom is going to be a little bit wider, as it would be closer if you're looking up the lantern. So doing the same thing, straight down, just a smidge out to the right. And now we have those straight lines. We're going to connect from here down to that lower left dot, and same goes for the right. Once you have that, we'll color it in. The hard part is almost done. We have one more part of our lantern, and that is going to be that arm sticking out from the left side of our post here. I'm going to make one dot for where I want that arm, maybe about 3 fingers down. And I want it to kind of come up at an angle as, with perspective, it would be coming larger as well as it's coming towards us. So I'm going to go pretty much straight over, centered kind of between this lantern and the edge, and then I'm going to bump up maybe about an inch, inch and a half, making a dot. So now I can connect these 2 dots. Nice straight line there. And always remember to breathe with these lines. I catch myself holding my breath all the time. And at the end, I'm going to make a ball. So with this brush, you can draw it out. You can use a tiny brush, but this one, if you actually twirl it in your fingers, you can make a perfect circle. Put more pressure on there and spin it around. You'll get that circle. And I'm going to add just a little bit of width to the end of this post here, coming back, keeping it nice and thin back here. So just a little bit of thickness near the end as it would appear bigger and closer. And there we are. So let's go ahead and take a little break. Make sure you clean off that brush. Welcome back to Picture This. Now that I have finished drawing out my lantern, I'm going to continue on with black and making the wreath and all the fun details. With my middle-sized flat brush, I'm going to use the black and start my wreath, making it look like a bunch of twigs. First, I'm going to start with that circular shape. Right above that arm, I'm going to start with a bunch of flicks going all the way around. Once you got that, we're going to go ahead and clean off our brush. So now we can move to our tiniest brush. We're going to add in some black twigs throughout our background to create a little bit more depth. So with a little bit of black, nice light pressure with this little brush, even actually watering it down. So if you take a scoop to the side, dip that brush in your water and mix that in. This is going to help that paint be a little bit more fluid and smoother lines on the canvas. You can always do a practice run on your palette. But from here, I'm just going to add some branches kind of coming in from the left and right side of my canvas, and really light pressure, just kind of waving it across. Now that we have our black, we may as well continue and finish our last step with that lantern, and that is going to be those lines that go through our lantern to create those panels of glass. So really light pressure, going to outline that left and right side to start. The tough part is over. So let's go ahead and clean off our brush. And I'm going to go back to my middle-sized flat tip. I think the lantern looks awfully flat, all black, especially with that light. You would obviously have some glare. We're going to use that middle-sized brush and start with a little bit of white. Actually, if you have a bunch of gray, you can just use from the background. Either way, I'm going to darken it up. So even white and then add a little bit more black this time. Nice little pile. So kind of like a dark charcoal. And with this brush, I'm going to use the wide side of it to add those nice glares. And sometimes the thin, I'll kind of show you as we walk through. So around the ball, I'm just going to use the thin side of the brush and add a highlight going around the top. And maybe a little bit on this arm to divide where that wreath is in front of and behind. So I'm even add some towards the back there. And for the post, I'm going to outline just inside of that black edge with this color. So I'm going to come down and then I'm going to curve it out around that post and down to make it look like it's actually coming out of that side there. I'm going to add a highlight with the thin side of the brush across each of those angles and maybe the left side around that curve. And same goes from up here. quick motions, just adding that light highlight. Got that full left side and the left side of each part of the top of your lantern. I always like to keep it consistent, so you always have that same light source and that little curve and across the top of the ball. So now it doesn't look so flat. We'll go ahead and clean up our brush. And now for the next step, we can add in the berries for our wreath. One thing I forgot to mention is a Q-tip can be handy this step. You can use that really tiny brush and draw each of those berries, but if you have a Q-tip, it works perfect because sometimes just one touch gets you that perfect berry every time. So with that red, I'm going to get a good amount on that Q-tip, or you can use a small brush. And you'll notice if I just do one touch, that makes that perfect berry, or if you want them to be bigger, you can spiral out. So that's as many berries I'm going to go. I'm going to go ahead and put that Q-tip down. And my favorite step, the final step of adding all of the fun snow throughout. So I'm going to be using that largest flat tip brush, and I'm going to be just using white here. With the snow, I just want to do a bunch of dabbling. So I want to think of where gravity is going to make that snow land. So on the top of the branches, the top of the edges of our lantern, the arm, and even throughout the wreath. So I'm just going to start with the tops of the branches, just in random spots. One other thing I want to do to my lantern too to make that glass look shiny, using that thin side of my brush, just kind of do a quick swipe on the right side of each of those panels of glass there, and maybe one going across the top. Just adds a little bit more to it. We can also continue with that snow then down into our wreath. I just be careful, sometimes those berries can be wet, so those Q-tips put it on nice and thick, but we can just dabble around the top of some of those branches all the way throughout. Right, so that is all of my snow that has landed. I'm going to start with the snow that is falling. That's one of my favorite parts, but it can be a mess. I am going to start with some white off to the side, and it is really important that we really water this down. So using that large brush, I'm going to dip it into my cup of water a couple of times. Okay, so then with the flicking, to add that snow, there's a couple ways to do it. Either way, you want to hold your brush very close to your canvas, and sometimes hitting it on the back will get those splats, or you can take your fingers and flick that way. It's a little bit more control. But I'm just going to add it throughout the entire piece. All right, so now I got my winter lantern. I'm going to go ahead and clean up that brush. And before I think I'm done, an artist always signs their work. I'm going to choose black down there in the lower corner. There we are, our winter lantern masterpiece. Thank you for following along with me, Mercedes Faub, at the Captured on Canvas studio. We'll see you next time on Picture This.